Once upon a time, a man was seen busy playing an MMOVR game. The man looked very focused. He had spent 10 years of his life just to prepare for this moment. The man was widely known by the username SR as a very popular MMOVR player. SR was very dedicated to his life, his dreams, and even his reason for living, all only for achieving his goal alone. The man has now succeeded in achieving his goal, winning the Venom solo battle and completing the game he had been playing for that long. The MMOVR Tempest, a game whose number of players has now increased rapidly, even reaching over 1 million players. Despite so many fans, not a single player has managed to complete a dungeon with SS difficulty. However, that day was history. A player with the username SR finally managed to complete a dungeon with SS difficulty for the first time. The figure behind SR is an orphan whose parents died in an accident. The shock of their sudden death caused the man's health to deteriorate. He even had to quit his job. After that, he began to isolate himself and spend all his time playing games. Time passed. Without realizing it, the man had become a 30-year-old NET. He had been exploring and playing the game for 10 years, but now he had completed it. The final boss in the game had been defeated. Now the man had to start thinking about what to do tomorrow and beyond. In fact, it had been a long time since he last touched water to bathe. The man then closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he woke up to a notification window asking if the player was willing to reincarnate. The man was quite confused and thought for a moment. If he accepted the reincarnation option, it was possible that all his achievements would be reset from the beginning. If so, of course, everything he had done for the past 10 years could be said to be in vain. The man thought for a moment, and finally a smile appeared on his face. He chose to reincarnate because his gamer soul would never pass up an opportunity to reincarnate. The moment the agree button was selected, the man felt a very real sensation. He was so amazed, but in such a short time, the man seemed to hear and see a figure with long hair who said that she was relying on him. The man was quite surprised, not knowing what happened, but suddenly his vision was so dazzling. There was a very loud voice, sounding grateful for the appearance of the figure who was said to be a great hero. The man then opened his eyes. He was confused why he was lying on the floor. He then recognized the place. The place he was in at that time was the Kingdom of Lindell from the game Tempest. The man was quite surprised when he saw the character of King Zeno, so realistic. The man then tried to check the logout button in his settings, but how shocked and panicked he was when he didn't find what he was looking for. One of the characters, who appeared to be a priest or something, approached the man. In his mind, he was grateful that the hero had appeared immediately after the summoning ritual had been completed without a hitch. However, just as he was about to greet the hero, the so-called hero suddenly vomited his entire stomach contents onto the priest's royal robes, especially in front of King Zeno and the people present. SR had truly been reincarnated. How did he know? Because the vomiting sensation he had just felt was very real. SR was allowed to rest for a while in his room. His body felt uncomfortable, especially when he thought back to everything that had just happened. After remembering, SR had done something he shouldn't have done in front of the king and his subordinates. Normally, SR should have been sentenced to death for such an insolent act in front of the king. During his rest, SR still looked for the logout button, but until then, he couldn't find it. When checking the menu window, SR looked surprised and shocked because there should have been many items in his inventory. However, it seemed that the reincarnation status had erased all of his inventory and previous playtime. Instantly, SR looked frustrated. In his mind, he had many things he had to do, but when he thought back, SR realized that he had nothing to do. SR has now successfully entered the game world, where he escaped from his usual reality. He began to think that maybe by reincarnating into the game, he gained some advantage. SR checked the menu window again, and found that all his previous stats were gone. Now he was just SR, an 18-year-old young man with level 1, while his skills and jobs were still empty. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. Someone asked SR's permission to meet. The one who came was the maid girl he had seen earlier. The maid called SR a hero. SR, who heard this, felt uncomfortable and tried to ask if he could resign as a hero. The maid was quite confused and asked if SR was not a hero. SR then showed his status, and the maid was shocked to see SR's job empty when it should have said hero if he was a hero. Another figure knocked on the door and entered. He was King Zeno, who was worried about the hero's condition. SR was then shocked and tense. King Zeno asked the hero to calm down and not to worry, but he couldn't. SR was already burdened by what he did earlier, and with the call of Sir Hero, that everyone addressed him with. King Zeno looked confused as to why the hero, who was successfully summoned, looked down. SR then explained his condition, which suddenly made everyone present there surprised. It turned out, the great hero figure they managed to summon was only someone with level 1 and without a job or skill. Everyone was shocked that SR was not a hero. SR could see the disappointed expressions on everyone's faces. He was also confused about explaining that he was just a NET. All SR could do was apologize to everyone there. The king was disappointed, but he didn't lose his wisdom. King Zeno was well aware that SR didn't need to apologize to them, especially since they had intentionally summoned SR, even though SR wasn't the hero they had hoped for. The king and his subordinates bowed to apologize to SR. While it was true that SR was also a victim, the situation was still very awkward. One of the kingdom's most prominent figures, and one whose royal robes were soiled by SR, spoke out and explained the situation. The kingdom was actually trying to summon a hero from another world using a summoning diamond, apparently the only one in that world. The large-scale ritual was being carried out because their kingdom's first princess was seriously ill. The princess's condition was so critical that, according to the royal doctor, she only had a month to live. SR seemed confused by the concept of a hero that he had concluded. Were heroes in that world meant to have the ability to cure diseases? But the answer was no. The reason heroes were needed was because the kingdom wanted them to obtain an elixir for them. SR was shocked because his memories came back. SR knew about elixirs because in his previous stats, he had approximately 100 elixirs in his inventory. SR had no idea that the elixir would be so valuable. The king seemed very frustrated because no one was able to obtain elixirs in the AB rank dungeon. SR, who heard King Zeno's anxiety, was then at a loss because, as far as he knew, AB rank dungeons were the easiest dungeons to conquer. SR went to meet the first princess of the kingdom, Princess Fenin. At that time, the princess was with her younger brother. The prince then left when SR arrived. SR was asked by the king to pretend to be the hero for a while. The reason was simple, so that the princess would still have hope for the coming tomorrow. King Zeno wanted SR to tell his daughter that SR was a great hero who had been successfully summoned by the kingdom from another world. SR felt unskilled in such a thing, but he still obeyed. SR faced Princess Fenin and introduced himself as Sewer, the hero who was summoned to save the princess. SR felt unable to refuse the king's request, even willing to bow his head before SR. SR granted King Zeno's request not because the man was king, but because SR considered the king's feelings as a parent who loved his daughter very much. The princess looked calm. She had heard the news of SR from her father. Although she knew SR's existence was for Princess Fenin's survival, the princess didn't want SR to push himself too hard. SR saw the princess's smile directly. He then resolved to delve a little deeper into his role. He told the princess that he would definitely save Princess Fenin. The meeting with SR was over. The prince returned to accompany Princess Fenin, and not long after, another guest came to visit the princess. That guest was Sarah. Sarah arrived with great fanfare. Not only was she noisy, but her appearance was also battered. The girl had just completed a C-rank dungeon up to the 3rd floor, although the results were not very satisfactory. Princess Fenin smiled and said that Sarah could ask someone else to enter the dungeon, but Sarah immediately refused. The girl was eager to quickly complete the B-rank dungeon because no one knew when Princess Fenin's health would deteriorate. The princess then asked Sarah to stop going into the dungeon alone. Sarah gasped. Princess Fenin was worried about the girl. She was afraid that Sarah wouldn't be able to live the life of a noble princess because she might hurt herself in the dungeon. Princess Fenin suggested that Sarah recruit party members at the guild, but it wasn't something Sarah hadn't tried. Sarah had tried, but no one wanted to be in a party with her. Sarah wasn't immediately rejected. Initially, some were willing to join, but when Sarah started ordering her around and complaining about how her members ran the party, Sarah was kicked out of the group. The princess looked upset, thinking that Sarah couldn't cooperate, but she couldn't tell Sarah. Princess Fenin then encouraged Sarah. Sarah's concern for her daughter's well-being over her own was enough to make her happy. The princess also revealed that her father had summoned a hero. Despite lingering doubts, Princess Fenin wanted to believe in the true hero she had summoned, because that was her only hope. Sarah returned. The girl was surprised why the guild had only just summoned the hero at that time. Sarah had considered Princess Fenin as her own sister. Therefore, she could not wait patiently. The girl immediately rushed to the dungeon as fast as she could. When at the guild, Sarah was asked to meet Regulus, the guild master. Regulus conveyed an assignment from King Zeno to Sarah. Sarah was asked to escort someone for 10 days. Sarah was surprised. The girl certainly wanted to refuse because she didn't have time for that. She had to go to the dungeon immediately. However, Regulus warned Sarah that it was their duty to obey the king. An annoyed Sarah then wondered who exactly she had to escort for the next 10 days. The figure Sarah had to escort was Sewer, a hero summoned to save Princess Fenin. Sewer was there and denied that he was not a hero, even that he was only a level 1 person. Sarah didn't hear that. All she could think about was Princess Fenin's words about the hero summoned by King Zeno. Sarah then spoke. She couldn't believe that the young man with an ordinary appearance was a hero. Sewer and Sarah then got to know each other briefly. Sewer said that he actually didn't need to be escorted, but Regulus refused because Sewer was considered an honored guest of their kingdom. Sewer seemed to have a bad first impression on Sarah. The girl concluded that Sewer felt like a selfish young man. SR had requested a one-on-one duel against a D-rank adventurer. Regulus then informed Sewer that they had received permission from Dino. SR was quite curious who his opponent would be, and sure enough, the answer was Sarah. They went to an open area. Regulus then apologized to Sarah for involving her in it. Sarah didn't mind it, but she was a little doubtful whether the king had really allowed it because Sarah had the qualifications as an advanced level swordsmaster, while the hero was only a low-level swordsman, even below level 5. The girl was sure that she would not be a match for Sewer. Sarah even wondered what if she accidentally caught Sewer. Regulus honestly also looked confused because Sewer also seemed very confident. In fact, the young man was eager to start and end the fight quickly. Hearing what Sewer said provoked Sarah. The girl stepped forward, but first she asked if the young man really wanted to fight her because at that time, Sewer still had time to cancel their duel. Sewer smiled. The young man even offered to throw away his weapon. He wanted their duel to be a show. Sewer was undaunted and would not back down. The young man said that in his eyes Sarah did not seem as strong as Sarah thought. Sewer even said that Sarah, who seemed capable of clearing a C-rank dungeon, would certainly not be difficult for Sewer to fight. SR did not stop talking about things that had the potential to provoke Sarah. He even offered to admit defeat if Sarah could land one attack on him within 5 minutes. Sewer said that their duel would not be a good fight if he did not make it easier for Sarah. The provocation succeeded in making Sarah furious. The girl then attacked with her sword while SR only dodged. Sarah intended to end SR with one attack, but SR continued to dodge. Sewer even said the movement she would do, like she would take 2 steps back or 1 step. The young man smiled, asking what was wrong with Sarah. SR provoked again by saying that it seemed the D-rank adventurer was not as strong as he imagined. 3 minutes had passed since Sarah advanced to attack SR. Regulus was still there to watch the duel. A young man came to greet him. The man was quite curious to know who the figure Sarah was fighting was. Regulus told the young man that Sarah's opponent was a beginner who was a level 5 swordsman who had just registered for the Serikin yesterday. The young man was very surprised. Sarah looked exhausted, while SR remained calm. The girl couldn't believe her opponent. There was no way a level 5 swordsman could be so difficult to handle. Sarah hadn't even been able to land a single attack on Sewer. The girl was already at the limit of her strength. With everything she had faced, Sarah refused to give up. Sarah forced herself to move because in her mind she was determined not to lose to Sewer. SR looked surprised by Sarah's sudden movement, but it didn't make her afraid. The young man could still read Sarah's movements exactly like in the game. SR read all the movements like reading a book. Sarah fell with just one barehanded attack from SR. The girl even fell and was caught by SR. Regulus and the young man who was watching were very shocked, while SR couldn't believe that his opponent had fainted. They wondered who SR really was. Regulus felt confused about how he should explain the situation of the duel to the Dino Lord. Flashback to the day before the duel with Sarah. On the day when SR met Princess Fenin, afterward he went to visit the city. SR felt that the city he visited was slightly different from the game, but the graphics were still very good. There was a place SR had to visit. That place was the Adventurers Guild that issued licenses for adventurers to explore dungeons. SR immediately entered when he found the Adventurers Guild building. The inside of the building looked exactly like the one in the game. SR immediately went to the receptionist to register. It reminded him of the first time he played the game. When filling out the form, SR found a difference from the game he played before. There, the main job was called a low-level job, and the secondary job was called a high-level job. Because of this difference, SR immediately asked the receptionist about other things, especially about the dungeon ranking order. What SR understood was that the easiest level of a dungeon was rank F and above. The receptionist began to explain. If an adventurer reaches level 30 in an F-rank dungeon, they will move to a higher job and become an E-rank adventurer. High-rank job holders are allowed to enter E-rank and above, while low-rank job holders are only allowed to enter F-rank. Hearing this explanation, SR was certainly shocked and realized. What the receptionist had just explained was a guild policy to protect novice adventurers. From there, SR realized that this world was different from games that could be restarted repeatedly. In that world, once you die, you can't restart. If so, according to guild policy, SR couldn't immediately explore the dungeon at will. Suddenly, a girl threw a tantrum in the guild, screaming for permission to enter a B-rank dungeon right away. The girl was Sarah. A young man who was a senior adventurer named Shin there tried to calm Sarah down and said that Sarah would not be able to get permission to enter a B-rank dungeon if she had not completed a C-rank dungeon. Instead of calming down, Sarah asked Shin for another shortcut. Shin didn't want to lie to Sarah. Even if Sarah were included in his party, it wouldn't necessarily help Sarah because her presence would definitely be a burden for Shin's party. Hearing this, Sarah became even more furious, even though what Shin said was not wrong, because his party was the top party in the kingdom. Sarah's behavior seemed to be commonplace, as the guild was no longer surprised, even discussing it as if it were routine. Sarah was said to act this way every day, throwing tantrums and demanding to be allowed into B-rank dungeons without completing the previous rank. Everyone was starting to get fed up and ignore Sarah's arbitrary behavior, even though she was a noble's daughter. SR was still there, thinking. The young man wanted to level up quickly so he could enter dungeons and obtain elixirs, but repeating F-rank missions to level up was too inefficient. SR pondered what he should do. The young man then remembered that the king had given him a dagger with the royal crest. The dagger could certainly be used when needed. SR then understood how solid authority was. He then showed the dagger to the guild receptionist. Immediately, the receptionist rushed off to call the guild leader. SR's request was just as much a violation of guild rules as Sarah's. The young man, with a cocky look, said while showing the dagger. He said that he wanted to rise to E or D rank even with low-level jobs. Because of his actions, SR ended up in the guild leader's office, Regulus. Regulus looked tired because he had just finished dealing with Sarah's tantrum. He had also heard about SR's situation from Dino earlier. Regulus was also concerned about SR's condition. SR seemed worried that their conversation would be overheard, but in fact, the room was soundproof. Regulus knew SR's request and wish, but as the guild leader, he couldn't grant it because it was considered too dangerous. SR had expected that response. He had also considered other offers. SR proposed what if he managed to win a duel against a D-rank adventurer. If SR succeeded, he wanted his rank to be raised to D rank. Regulus asked for time to decide, and SR granted it. The young man admitted that he still had business, namely conquering a dungeon. SR went to an F-rank dungeon. In the dungeon, a woman named Lisa was on duty as a dungeon receptionist. Lisa's job was very simple, and the woman was also a big fan of Shin's adventuring party, Lightning Trail. Lisa became a receptionist so she could meet her idol, but her placement in an F-rank dungeon made that impossible because the dungeon was only visited by beginners. That night, Lisa suddenly had a guest. SR came to enter the dungeon. Lisa immediately allowed him, and SR was asked to stand in the teleportation circle. SR was then reminded by Lisa that if the conditions in the dungeon were dangerous, SR could return instantly by using forced return. SR smiled and thanked her and left after saying his goodbyes. SR left, leaving Lisa alone. The woman's shift ended at 10 p.m., but she still hadn't left until 2 a.m. The reason was because she was worried about SR. The woman was worried that SR would die in the dungeon because he was still a beginner, but her exhaustion after work made her care more about him. Lisa was about to go home when suddenly SR returned. The woman was very surprised because SR returned intact and safe. Lisa felt relieved for a moment. She advised SR not to try to enter the dungeon alone in the future. SR smiled. The young man said lightly that he had completed the dungeon, even up to the final boss. Flashback ends. Back to the time after the duel with Sarah. Sarah stared at SR. SR felt uncomfortable with that gaze. SR had apologized for the previous fight with Sarah. He even made Sarah faint. SR also remembered all the harsh words and provocations to Sarah. Although he felt guilty, it was something he only did out of necessity. SR never thought that he would be able to win the duel against Sarah. The difference in their levels was very large. At first SR was doubtful, but he also remembered that he had the ice skill that he relied on in the game. With one use of that skill, Sarah was able to avoid it, and SR won the duel. However, Sarah's sword technique was quite impressive for him. SR honestly wanted to enjoy the duel a little longer, but unfortunately that could not be granted. Sarah was even still lying down because she was unconscious after fighting SR. Sarah was still lying feverish in her residence. SR returned to Regulus and asked to be allowed to enter the dungeon. Unfortunately, Regulus still couldn't grant the request. Regulus wanted SR to understand his position as guild leader. Sarah was a childhood friend of Princess Fenin, who, if she didn't get an order from the king, couldn't enter the dungeon. Regulus wanted SR to be willing to be escorted by Sarah. If the young man agreed, Regulus promised. Talk to Dino so that SR would be allowed to explore dungeons of rank E and above. SR finally agreed. The next day, SR went out accompanied by Sarah, but he felt uncomfortable. SR continued to get cynical looks from Sarah, and the girl's attitude that seemed annoyed made SR quite confused about how to behave. SR apologized for the fight from earlier that left Sarah unconscious for a few days. Sarah replied curtly, saying that the fight in question was won by Sarah. SR was stunned in disbelief, but Sarah assured her by saying that she had hit SR with her own chin just before fainting. Sarah insisted that the duel was her victory. SR, not wanting to prolong the problem, then simply confirmed what Sarah said. With that, SR concluded that Sarah was a stupid girl who hated losing. Of course, Sarah was furious. From that moment on, SR's day of exploring the dungeon had begun. SR went to explore the E-rank dungeon escorted by Sarah. SR initially intended to enter the dungeon alone and return 2 hours later, but Sarah chose to do her duty as a bodyguard. SR seemed a little disappointed because if they entered the dungeon together, the experience would be split in half. Sarah didn't care, she just wanted to do her duty as a bodyguard. SR could no longer refuse. Sarah was forced to be allowed to go with him. As usual, SR was greeted by the dungeon receptionist. He was asked to immediately step into the teleportation circle. SR still couldn't hold back his embarrassment when someone called him Mr. Hero. Sarah was quite happy when she saw SR's expression. The real reason why Sarah insisted on coming along was not because she wanted to do her duty, but because she wanted to know how SR actually fought. Sarah was ambitious to uncover and find out the secret of SR's strength directly on the front lines. They arrived at the first floor of the E-rank dungeon. As expected, the appearance matched what SR had seen in the game. It was always midday in the dungeon. Sarah, who heard SR's words, was suspicious of how the young man seemed familiar with the dungeon ecosystem when it was his first time setting foot in a dungeon. SR was naturally quite confused and immediately found an excuse to evade Sarah's suspicions. He said that the dungeon looked exactly the same as they'd told him. Honestly, SR was indeed very experienced in games when it came to dungeon exploration. The main highlight of JN Tempest is dungeon exploration. Dungeons generally consist of 5 floors, and the adventurer might fight the dungeon's boss once they clear all 5 floors. And when they defeat the boss, they succeed in clearing the dungeon. Tens of enemies are placed on each floor. When adventurers defeat them, the adventurer gets moved to the next floor. In that world, the dungeon order is A to F rank, starting with the F rank dungeon and raising their levels up. Before completing the dungeon, SR said goodbye to Sarah. The girl invited her. SR felt so awkward between the two of them. SR didn't want to think further because now he needed to focus. Time to enter the dungeon. SR sharpened his senses, detected the presence of the target, and prepared. A scorpion-type red crow will soon appear. Sarah saw that scorpion. The girl thought that the scorpion wasn't that difficult a monster, just a little troublesome. SR slashed the monster so accurately, making Sarah very surprised. The young man asked because he was worried that the result of his attack hit Sarah. Sarah acted grumpy because the scorpion's fragments almost hit her. SR apologized for that. He was just too used to fighting alone without paying attention to his surroundings. SR resumed his actions. Sarah returned to her focus. From her perspective, Sarah judged that SR's swordsmanship, stamina, and speed were not extraordinary. But one thing that was truly extraordinary was the accuracy of his attacks. From there, Sarah concluded that SR's eyes must be very good. SR's ability to read enemy movements was above average. Thus, SR was able to move efficiently while minimizing the wasted stamina. This was the first time Sarah had seen such a fighting style. The girl was now quite curious about what kind of world SR used to live in. Unbeknownst to Sarah, SR had finished the fight on the first floor. They would move to the second floor. To move to the second floor using the teleportation circle, Sarah had to hold SR's loot for him. Sarah complied. When he was about to move, SR apologized for the long fight because his level was still low. Sarah didn't mind. SR then asked to confirm that Sarah was Princess Fennen's childhood friend. SR got the information from Regulus. Sarah was then shocked. Regulus even told SR that for the sake of Princess Fennen's survival, Sarah wanted to find an elixir. Sarah confirmed it. He even said that Sarah was pressed for time for it. That's why Sarah impulsively insisted on being allowed to explore the B-rank dungeon. From the conversation, Sarah, who seemed slapped by reality, was given the option by SR to rely on him alone. Sarah didn't understand the meaning of SR's words. The girl took SR's meaning that she, who lost to SR, was deemed incapable. SR was shocked. That wasn't what he meant, but it seemed Sarah misunderstood even more. SR tried to explain, but Sarah changed the subject, saying that SR should swing his arms against monsters instead of using his mouth to speak. SR then became frustrated. He was well aware that whenever an introvert like him tried to engage in banter, they just messed it up. An hour passed. SR had finished completing all 5 floors of the E-rank dungeon. SR looked happy because he would soon reach level 10. Sarah was quite curious if SR intended to fight the dungeon boss, and of course the answer was yes. Sarah doubted because the last SR level she knew would not have a chance, but how surprised the girl was when she found out that SR's level had reached level 9. The E-rank dungeon's boss appeared. The monster was a flame gazelle. Sarah warned SR to be careful while the young man had already advanced to attack. SR knew the monster's weakness. SR made repeated attacks on his target point, and finally the young man then made the final attack. Sarah, who watched closely, was very surprised. All the movements that SR did gave the impression that SR really knew what to do and where the opponent's weak spot was. It was something that was hard for Sarah to believe. The battle was over. SR rose to level 10, so his status would also rise. SR kindly apologized for the long time that had passed because he had waited for him to finish. Since it was still noon, SR tried to invite Sarah to have lunch together, but Sarah refused and even clearly said that she hated SR. Although stabbed by Sarah's sharp words, SR could not do anything. They would return. Suddenly, Sarah asked who had taught SR swordsmanship. SR replied that he taught himself autodidactically. Sarah was very surprised. SR did not understand the meaning of Sarah's sudden question. The girl again asked how long SR had practiced swordsmanship. SR replied that he had practiced for 10 years. Sarah was very surprised and seemed to not accept it because she had studied swordsmanship every day for the past 20 years. SR felt awkward responding. The young man then praised her. Sarah did not accept the praise. She felt that she had reached the limit of her development many times. Sarah was sure that SR, who was born as a natural genius, had never felt that way. SR was stunned. The young man then responded that he was not a talented person. SR remembered his past. He had spent 10 years in the game, exploring dungeons without knowing boredom or fatigue. SR healed himself from illness due to the demands of work and the death of his parents. SR tried various ways of fighting in the game and found one that felt suitable for him. With all those experiments, Sarah wanted to call the fighting style that SR had found through many trials and errors just a talent. Of course, SR didn't like it. SR spontaneously said that if Sarah wanted to call the sharpness of SR's eyes a talent, then Sarah was right in a sense. But if Sarah wished to call SR's other fonts a talent, if Sarah was the type of person who would chalk up all of that to the simple word talent, then SR honestly said that he also hated Sarah. SR realized he had spoken his mind. He realized that Sarah didn't fully understand SR's situation, but SR still took her seriously. The young man honestly felt bad because he was just playing a game. But even though it was just a game, SR worked his ass off to play that game. He had never experienced that sort of thing when he played the game by himself. From that day on, SR became more convinced that he was indeed better suited for solo play. They exited the dungeon. The achievement that day was SR's increased level and them successfully clearing an E-rank dungeon. A few days later, Sarah woke up and got ready. The girl was still thinking about what SR said in the dungeon. Sarah felt annoyed that she had to feel hurt by what SR said that day. She shouldn't have cared. Just like Sarah, SR seemed disturbed too. It had been 3 days since their argument. Since that day, SR hadn't really talked to Sarah. After clearing the E-rank dungeon, SR also cleared the D-rank dungeon, but Sarah didn't follow him past the entrance of the D-rank. During those 3 days, SR continued farming D-rank. Now his swordsmanship level had increased. SR even now had the ability to detect the presence of monsters. SR was about to move on to the next stage. Since he had reached level 30, he thought it was time to change jobs. When Sarah heard SR's plan, she was understandably shocked. Instead of choosing to advance to an advanced class, SR was actually planning to change jobs, which would risk restarting the levels. SR struggled to explain, especially when Sarah opposed the decision. SR felt he needed to do so because he noticed a difference in the stat menu in this world compared to the previous game. The stat menu in this world was too simple and not detailed. Because of that, the job change system is misunderstood. Stats that increased at level 30 remain even after switching classes. That's why leveling every basic class is essential. However, knowledge about the game is still unknown. The reality could be the opposite. SR couldn't leak that recklessly. Because of this, SR couldn't give Sarah a specific reason to approve his job change. The simple reason he put forward was that he was simply bored. Of course, Sarah couldn't understand SR's boredom, because only someone insane enough to change a swordsman with a smile would do that. But Sarah couldn't refuse either. That was SR's decision. The girl then gave him an or for changing into a basic class. Sarah wanted to confirm first that what SR would do was change his basic job, not raise it to the advanced level. SR was asked to hold the or tightly. The change then occurred, and SR was no longer a swordsman but a fighter. Immediately after changing jobs, SR rushed into the dungeon. Sarah was quite worried about whether the young man would be okay entering the dungeon when his job had changed to basic. SR didn't see any problem. He asked for Sarah's cooperation that day. Unable to prevent him, Sarah only reminded him to keep in touch if at any time his condition was in danger. SR entered the dungeon. He felt that day was quite easy in negotiating with Sarah. He suspected maybe it was because of their last fight. SR didn't want to lose focus. He returned to the dungeon battle. Immediately after defeating the monsters in the dungeon climate that looked like a snowy area, SR felt a chill in his body. SR continued fighting until the end, even though his body was quite tortured. SR felt happy. He loved playing in adverse conditions. SR's decision to change jobs was not without consideration. Not only because of the level 30 stay carryover, SR predicted there's a special kind of job change possible. Just like in the game, if you raise a basic class to level 30, swordsman, fighter, cleric, archer, etc., then you can change into an advanced class. For example, changing the swordsman and fighter jobs until reaching level 30, and it will change into a hybrid class like sword fighter. SR was sure there must also be a derived secondary job. SR tried to believe what he suspected. When SR had reached level 30 again, he told Sarah again that he wanted to change jobs. Of course, the girl was surprised again. This time, SR wanted to change to cleric. The young man intended to improve all existing jobs. In the end, Sarah was no longer surprised. She actually asked what SR's real goal was. SR seemed to have difficulty giving an answer. SR finally made up his mind. He wanted Sarah to promise that she would believe what he said. She also couldn't betray him, and she couldn't do anything rash or careless. SR said that if Sarah could fulfill SR's request, then SR was also willing to tell him how to become strong. Sarah didn't immediately decide. She wanted time to think. Now her task of escorting SR was complete. The girl guessed that SR would definitely return to the dungeon the next day. SR would probably clear the C-rank dungeon easily. With Sarah's calm demeanor, SR actually felt afraid. The girl didn't have any intentions. He realized that there was a possibility that in the future they would still meet. Sarah left with a smile that caught SR's eye. The young man wasn't sure, but it seemed they had become more open with each other that day. SR suspected it was a good thing. That night, since SR first arrived in that world, he had felt so alone. But that loneliness didn't last long. SR was excited again, but also worried about the derived secondary job. SR knew that derived secondary jobs didn't exist in that world yet, but he still wanted to try. The first things he would improve were swordsman and fighter. SR was serious. Finally, the young man managed to get the sword fighter job. With his hypothesis proven successful, SR could now begin to formulate a timeline of what he needed to do. Princess Fennen's estimated lifespan was approximately 20 days. SR wanted to hurry, but his body seemed to be warning him that he wasn't getting enough sleep. SR was curious to see if there was coffee like the one in Japan. Princess Fennen is a girl who loves stories about faraway lands, a legendary wizard living alone by the swamp, and a dragon living deep in the mountain. Among them, what captivated Princess Fennen the most was a chamber of time where the god who created the world resides. When the princess was little, she met little Sarah, who was very curious about Princess Fennen, who was said to never leave the royal castle. The answer is, of course, yes, because Princess Fennen was too weak. Princess Fennen always had the desire to go out, but her father, King Zeno, forbade her. Little Sarah was not at a loss. She told Princess Fennen about a very popular cake shop in town. She invited the princess to sneak out. Of course, the princess was very enthusiastic. Princess Fennen considered Sarah as her prince until she realized that Sarah was a girl like her. However, Princess Fennen could not erase her impression of Sarah in an instant. Sarah's actions in inviting Princess Fennen to sneak out of the royal castle were discovered by Dino. As a result, Sarah was scolded and even threatened with being banned from entering the royal castle area. Not for a trivial reason, but the decision to sneak out of the castle last time caused Princess Fennen's health to deteriorate to the point of fever. Dino scolded the little girl, who looked so guilty. Princess Fennen, who was lying in her bed, defended Sarah. She said that her previous actions were all because of Princess Fennen's wishes. Now both Sarah and Princess Fennen apologized to Dino. Dino then felt embarrassed. The man asked Sarah to confirm if the girl still often went to the dungeon regularly with her older brother. This was then confirmed by Sarah. Dino asked Sarah to tell Princess Fennen everything she did and found in the dungeon. Dino said that if one day Princess Fennen's health improves and the princess becomes stronger, then what Sarah said could be the basic knowledge that the princess has. Sarah was then very excited and enthusiastic. She said she would go into the dungeon and tell everything she did and found in the dungeon. Because of that, from that day on, Sarah went to the dungeon every day and afterward came to Princess Fennen to tell her story. One time when Sarah managed to defeat her first monster, the little girl had the dropped stone crafted and made into earrings. She showed it to the princess. Sarah wore the earrings as well as a reminder for her not to forget her beginnings. Sarah also gave a pair of similar earrings to Princess Fennen. Princess Fennen seemed uncomfortable at first, but seeing Sarah's sincerity, she then accepted the gift happily. Sarah hoped that with her gift Princess Fennen would feel closer to the dungeon because she knew the princess really liked the dungeon. After that, the princess's health actually worsened until one day Princess Fennen fell unconscious. Sarah, who heard the news, pushed herself even harder to enter the dungeon, but even with that, with the help of other adventurers, no one had ever found the elixir. Princess Fennen, who was getting weaker, was now sleeping more than awake. The princess also realized that her life might not be long. One of Princess Fennen's deepest desires was to go to the dungeon. Among those hopes and desires, the figure of SR suddenly appeared, giving new hope. The princess was sure that what SR said was not a lie. Many had said the same thing just to encourage Princess Fennen, and the princess was never sure, but it was different when she faced SR. Princess Fennen could realize that SR was someone enchanted by the dungeon, like Sarah was when they first met. With SR's presence, Princess Fennen had faith that the young man could really get her out. At least that's what the princess felt. One day, Princess Fennen was enjoying the cool sunshine in the garden. Sarah came, worried about whether the princess could be outside in her current condition. Princess Fennen felt that her condition was much better that day. However, Sarah, who had been observing the princess for a long time, realized that Princess Fenin was getting more and more fragile, and her body was now even thinner. The princess asked Sarah to tell her about SR. Sarah then began to tell her everything that happened during the 10 days she was guarding SR. Hearing the story, the princess was again excited to know that SR fought every day in the dungeon for her. Only Sarah felt concerned. Sarah realized that Princess Fenin actually knew that SR was not a hero, but the princess still wanted to believe that there was someone out there who was fighting and would save her. Princess Fenin suddenly asked if Sarah believed in SR. Sarah couldn't give a definite answer, but based on what had happened, SR's power was indeed better than hers. The princess seemed happy and said that SR looked similar to Sarah. Sarah didn't like being compared to SR, but the princess suddenly talked about her first meeting with SR. The princess asked again, but it seemed more like she was manipulating Sarah to obey so that Sarah would be a support for SR. The princess then returned to her room, leaving Sarah alone there. Elsewhere in the city, SR looked very exhausted and severely sleep-deprived. Her exhaustion was enough to make SR unable to focus. But all of that still couldn't overcome her shame over what she said to Sarah some time ago about the promise. Suddenly, SR met Sarah in front of the guild. Sarah apologized for what she said about talent some time ago. The girl even asked permission to be allowed to stay by SR's side. Sarah's words were so romantic that they made both of them feel awkward. Both of them knew the meaning of those words, but still couldn't contain their embarrassment. They then rushed into the guild because Regulus called. Sarah and SR were called because of a message from the kingdom that reported that Princess Fenin's condition was getting worse. The princess was even reported to only have 20 days left. Thus, the deadline for SR's task of getting elixir from a rank B dungeon was moved forward 10 days. Of course, Sarah, who was very close to the princess, was shocked to hear the news. Sarah tried to convince everyone that SR was able to get the elixir before the time, but SR seemed unable to promise. It was impossible even with all his achievements. SR knew it was impossible. The world now wasn't a game that he could reset. Once slashed, SR would be truly dead. Regulus accepted it with an open heart. If SR said it was impossible, then it must be so. The guild leader then asked SR to rest properly now because, from what he heard, SR continued diving in the dungeon non-stop. But SR didn't seem to give up. He offered another option by adding members to go in search of elixirs in the dungeon. Besides him and Sarah, SR needed at least 3 more veteran adventurers with AB rank. Sarah was willing to go down. Even though there was no guarantee it wouldn't be dangerous, the girl was still willing for the princess. Sarah hurried off to find 3 other people according to SR's criteria, leaving SR alone with Regulus in the room. SR began to get serious. She spoke to Regulus, demanding a promise that what she was about to tell would not be leaked to anyone else. Time passed. The next day SR woke up feeling unrefreshed, still very tired and sleepy. However, she had to go and stop by the guild first. Outside, Sarah was waiting for her. Sarah noticed that SR's face was still pale from lack of rest. SR didn't have time. She continued to explore the dungeon because the deadline was approaching. With all SR's efforts and persistence, Sarah became curious and asked, why was the young man trying so hard for Princess Fenin? Was there something SR wanted from the kingdom? Or perhaps SR actually wanted Princess Fenin to be his bride? Hearing that question made SR flinch. SR immediately denied Sarah's questions. However, it wasn't Sarah's fault. It was natural for Sarah to ask. SR in this case was an outsider who was suddenly summoned and given a troublesome task. Sarah wants to know what SR is really thinking. SR was silent for a moment. His true feelings, he also found it quite difficult to define. One thing he said was there was no big reason or motive for his actions. What SR believed to go that far was like the saying, there was a mountain in front of his eyes, so SR climbed it. SR changed the topic by inviting Sarah to hurry to the guild. In SR's mind, the young man was also annoyed because he chose to avoid answering. As far as he thought, SR had only been playing games for the past 10 years. He never bothered about what reasons made him keep playing so seriously. SR was just running away from something he hated, and that was the beginning. SR just wanted to be the best in the game he played. When they arrived at the guild, Sarah and SR were already awaited by 3 people who would be working with them. Sarah already seemed very familiar with them, one of whom was Shin. The other was Shin's party member, Lightning Trail. The first was Shin himself. Then there was Suzu, a priest, and Rika, a warrior. Rika was quite curious as to why they were gathered at the guild so early. SR wanted to speak, but his infirm condition made him stumble. The young man was truly experiencing severe sleep deprivation. Therefore, SR didn't want to beat around the bush and went straight to the point. He wanted everyone there to keep what he said confidential. SR then showed his status window. Everything seemed normal, but there was one new thing that was different, specifically in the job class section. Since everyone already knew, SR began to talk seriously about it. SR said that from now on, he would teach Sarah, Shin, Suzu, and Rika how to become stronger. SR explained in detail. Questions arose about whether they would be able to conquer a B-rank dungeon. SR was still unsure. He then explained how to change jobs to become like him, to switch to a lower-tier job and raise its level. All of this is marked by a certain feeling, defined in that world as a breakthrough. Breakthroughs happen every 10 levels and raise your power and magic. That increase is unique to the job, so if you change jobs, it disappears. The stat boosts at levels 30 and 60 remain even if you switch jobs. It's called a stat bonus. By leveling lower jobs, when you return to your advanced job, the boost carries over. If you boost all your stats this way, you will have an advantage when returning to your main jobs for the dungeon. At first, SR's words were almost unbelievable, but the proof was right before his eyes. Because of doing that, SR had to suffer from sleep deprivation. Rika wanted to know what SR's plan was regarding switching jobs. SR seemed to have a plan where first, Shin, a sword master, would switch to fighter to boost Shin's agility. Suzu was asked to switch to mage from her original priest. Meanwhile, Rika, a warrior, was asked to switch to swordsman. Sarah was quite enthusiastic waiting for her turn. The girl was asked to switch to archer. They found it hard to believe SR's words, but it was true. Rika wanted to know how SR knew this, but SR still couldn't tell them at that time. The next plan was that in 7 days, SR needed the 4 of them to clear floors 1 through 5 of the AB rank dungeon. Sarah then asked, "What about the dungeon boss?" Elixirs couldn't be obtained without defeating the dungeon boss. Therefore, regarding the B-rank dungeon boss, SR would be defeated alone. Everyone was shocked. The reason SR decided to fight the boss alone was because he felt more comfortable fighting solo, as so far he had always fought solo. Shin tried to understand this fighting style, but one thing he wanted to know was what really drove SR to go so far, even risking his own life for a princess he only met 10 days ago. If concluded, the essence of Shin's question was an expression of his distrust of SR. This statement was honestly the same as what Sarah had asked before they entered the guild that morning. SR was still quite confused about how to explain it. The young man seemed worried about his teammates' rejection if he told the truth, but ultimately, he answered that he simply hated giving up. SR refused to give up, even if it meant dying. By giving up without seeking any way forward, SR could never forgive himself. Everyone fell silent. The silence made SR awkward and confused. He realized he had been too honest in his answer. SR started the conversation again, saying that so far he had done everything alone, but this time he couldn't do anything alone, so this time he wanted to borrow their strength for his own benefit. Suzu giggled, unable to hold back her laughter. Sarah then told SR that even if it were a lie, SR should have said that he was doing that out of a desperate wish to save the princess. That would have sounded better. Shin was also quite amused by SR's answer. They were now solidly involved with SR. The best party in the kingdom, Lightning Trail, would team up with the hero. SR reminded everyone that he wasn't a real hero, but no one cared. That was the first time SR had struggled to win someone's trust with words. He had always assumed people would laugh at him or even reject him, so he had given up before he even started. SR usually kept his mouth shut, whether at work or even in games, but now, someone's decision was swayed by him. Of course, SR was happy. Sarah noticed his happy expression. The girl then teased him in an irritated tone, saying that SR looked happier than when he reconciled with Sarah. They then began a strategy meeting. The result was that starting tomorrow they would begin entering D-rank dungeons except for SR. SR would not participate because we needed to train in C-rank for leveling. Sarah seemed to be holding back for now. She still held on to SR's promise that he would help her become stronger. Sarah would collect on that promise as soon as they got the elixir. After saying that, Sarah then said goodbye. They would meet again 7 days later. After Sarah's death, SR drifted off into thought. Since he was reincarnated in that world, People trusted him so much even though SR was a stranger who had just been summoned to the kingdom. So far, SR had only fought for himself. Therefore, this time he wanted to try to fight for the people who trusted him. Time passed. Sarah and the Lightning Trail Party had been working hard for the past 7 days to obtain bonus stats. SR was also struggling. The young man was solo farming C-rank dungeons to raise his martial swordsman to level 30 and boost his street attack power. However, SR's stamina and physical condition were a problem. The young man should have reached his limit and been extremely exhausted. It was natural for him to feel so sleepy. His schedule was already very busy, but his condition prevented SR from leveling. The young man didn't want to fall behind Sarah and the others. Despite his fatigue, his sharp senses in detecting enemies were still not to be underestimated. SR could immediately recognize them, but the monsters that appeared were still small fry. SR was starting to get tired of waiting for the dungeon boss to appear. Finally, the awaited time arrived. Sarah, along with Shin, Suzu, and Rika, not forgetting SR, was now in a B-rank dungeon. SR had already been there waiting for Sarah and the others to arrive while resting and taking a short nap. Everyone could tell that SR looked very exhausted from having conquered the dungeon continuously without stopping. SR didn't want her condition to worry the others, so she changed the topic by asking about Sarah and the others' progress. At first, Sarah and the others were quite pessimistic about being able to achieve the bonus stat, but in the end, everything went smoothly. Sarah even managed to complete a C-rank dungeon, so now the girl has full permission to enter a B-rank dungeon. The dungeon receptionist immediately greeted those who were about to enter the B-rank dungeon. They were quite surprised when they saw SR moving with her pillow. SR asked if it would be a problem because while in the dungeon, SR would just watch until the 3rd floor. Regarding the monsters, they would be handled by Sarah and the others. While waiting for Sarah and the others, SR planned to sleep. That was not a problem. They began to enter the dungeon with a teleportation circle. When they arrived inside, Sarah suddenly thanked everyone for being willing to fight for Princess Fenin. Shin laughed. They all knew that it was an act of Sarah because Sarah was nervous. SR told Sarah not to be nervous. She just needed to do her best. When they reached the 1st floor, Shin and the others rushed forward while SR was allowed to sleep. Shin, Suzu, Rika, and Sarah fought with their new jobs. They were amazed by their new abilities. Shin was so happy and wanted SR to see. SR got a glimpse. Sarah was there to keep SR safe while she slept. SR enjoyed the deep sleep she had long missed. Shortly after, Sarah woke her because they had to move to the 4th floor. SR was quite surprised by how quickly they cleared the dungeon floor. No one was injured. If there were any, Suzu had treated them. Once again, Shin, Suzu, and Rika were very amazed by their job skills and the knowledge SR shared to increase bonus stats. Sarah just listened while sharing proud reactions and holding back a wide smile at SR. Sarah refocused and quickly urged the others to get up and finish their tasks, regardless of whether SR was a hero or not. Shin was also happy that SR had now earned Sarah's trust. SR wasn't so sure, but Rika and Suzu confirmed Shin's words. Sarah was a girl who didn't know anything about SR and didn't even ask anything about it. Even so, Sarah still decided to trust SR. That wasn't something just anyone could do. SR tried to believe it. Their words were true, and having Sarah as an ally was something to be grateful for. SR also wanted to believe in Sarah too. He was determined to tell Sarah about himself after the fight. They had moved to the 4th floor. Since SR had just woken up, she was allowed to warm up first. The others were already ready. On that floor, they would be fighting orcs. Shin led the command, assigning tasks to each team and warning everyone to be careful. A single blow from an orc was deadly for them. The battle was quite intense. SR, watching from a distance, was amazed to see Sarah's excellent teamwork, as if she had been part of the Lightning Trail Party from the start. However, the enemy's sudden movement was unexpected. Sarah got carried away and pushed herself too hard. Just when she thought she could cut the orcs, her sword shattered. Sarah was counterattacked. The girl was then thrown a great distance away, witnessed by everyone. Sarah fell to the ground, covered in blood. SR immediately asked Suzu to use healing magic on Sarah. Meanwhile, the others rushed forward to finish off the orcs that were still loose. In a short time, the orcs were handled so they could see Sarah's condition. Suzu had used healing magic, but Sarah had already lost a lot of blood. Suzu only managed to save Sarah from sudden death. but now Sarah was no longer able to fight. Sarah apologized for her carelessness, while Shin asked what they should do. Was it okay if they continued forward without Sarah? SR looked confused. The young man was upset because the situation was real, unlike in the game where he only needed to use healing to bring Sarah back into the fight. Sending Sarah home alone was also not the right choice. SR thoughtfully asked Sarah if the girl was at least capable of keeping up with them. Shin and the others were quite against the reckless decision, but SR meant for Sarah to just follow along. Regarding the fight, SR would fight in Sarah's place. They were quite unsure because it might be difficult. SR was also aware that her stats were not at their peak at that time. Back in the game days, clearing an AB rank dungeon required at least 1 stat at B and 2 or more at C. Meanwhile, Shin and the others only have around 1 stat at C. That's not just close to impossible, it could be called suicidal. Besides, seeing the other conditions, SR is sure that Shin, Suzu, and Rika are also in a tired condition. Sarah, who was injured, didn't want the others to be burdened by her. She was fine and would be fine. In the end, Sarah still went with them, with the note that whatever happened, they had warned her beforehand. They continued to the next floor. This time, Sarah was guarded by Suzu behind him. On the 5th floor, their enemy was an ogre. As soon as it appeared, SR charged forward, surprising the others. Shin and the others were asked to attack from another position. As usual, SR seemed to be able to read his opponent's movements. Therefore, he easily dodged. SR landed the first attack, but with his current power, that was barely a scratch. SR then used a different tactic. His movements now targeted the ogre's vision. With one slash, the large monster was blinded. With the enemy's vision gone, SR commanded the others to attack together. Everyone then charged forward, and within 15 minutes, the ogre was defeated. Shin and his comrades were once again amazed and praised SR. Hearing SR's praise made Sarah smile widely as if proud. Sarah then joined in boasting about SR as her master. However, SR reminded them not to lower their guard because the enemies were still swarming in. Another ogre appeared. Shin and the others were back on guard. SR was worried that his comrades were exhausted after fighting for 8 hours non-stop, but Rika calmed the young man by reminding him of their previous promise to bring SR to the boss. Shin agreed with what Rika said. He added that perhaps they were honestly just as stubborn as SR, never wanting to give up. Shin did laugh a while ago, but that was because he felt so similar to SR. That's why they'll back SR up with everything they've got, so that when they make it back safely, they can fight SR at full strength. Hearing those words made SR think. Back in the game, no one was left who could beat him. Eventually, he was deified. He didn't even compete with other players anymore. But now, standing face to face like that and hearing, "Someday I will defeat you, just watch," feels different. Sarah smiled as she told SR that the young man had made good comrades. SR was no longer alone, and he could rely on them a little. SR was stunned. His feelings were hard to define, but one thing was for sure. The young man was starting to act awkwardly. SR returned to the battle where Shin and the others had started. The battle this time had lasted for 3 hours and was still not over. Shin asked SR to take a break and let him, Rika, and Suzu finish the rest. Shin was sure they could as long as they didn't die. SR understood. The young man then retreated to where Sarah was. SR seemed doubtful, but he tried to trust Shin and the others. The young man began to lie down, feeling truly uneasy. Trusting others for him might mean fighting against that part of himself that won't fully trust, and SR wasn't used to it. SR immersed himself in rest, trying to regain his stamina. Time passed, and Sarah woke him. The enemy had been defeated. Shin, Suzu, and Rika were still alive but looked exhausted. They could only make hand signals to let SR know they were okay. SR was relieved that his comrades had kept their promise. Now he could move on to fight the dungeon boss alone. That battlefield had been passed down from everyone. SR was determined that he still had to go back and fight Shin and the others after the battle was over and the elixir was obtained. They had all moved to the B-rank dungeon, the boss stage. A vast expanse of landscape with edges lined with mountains. There was a large monster crouched and huddled alone. Shin and the others had never seen it before and mistook it for a large boulder. They only realized it later when the dungeon boss opened its large eyelids. The B-rank boss, the enemy SR would face, was a Cyclops. With a wide smile, SR asked Sarah and the others to retreat. From that point on, he would be the one fighting the enemy alone. SR was confident he would be fine, but as soon as he said that, a Cyclops attack was aimed at him. SR was able to dodge it. SR lured the Cyclops towards him and away from his comrades. SR nimbly and swiftly landed his attack on the creature, even causing the Cyclops to lose its sight. SR still felt able to follow the Cyclops' movements. From a distance, his colleagues looked amazed and in disbelief as they witnessed SR's flawless movements. Sarah then expressed her opinion. She had previously known that SR's eyes were not only sharp, but also incredibly sharp. This allowed SR to move, as if he already knew what would happen next. Shin and the others seemed forced to believe it, as SR was a figure from another world. Naturally, SR had no knowledge of the dungeons in that world. The battle between SR and the Cyclops was still intense, affecting those around them. Cyclops seemed to capitalize on the debris from their movements, catching, dodging, and throwing it back at the right time. After dodging, the next attack became a critical hit. SR was able to read the Cyclops' movement patterns. Of course, because the young man had beaten such opponents so many times, his body now memorized them. However, unfortunately, his body was in a very bad condition at that time, and he would certainly die in a single attack. Moreover, SR's level at that time was not that high. Even so, SR was enthusiastic about finishing it. SR had no intention of losing to some low-tier grunt. The fight continued, and SR's stamina slowly began to erode. The young man's vision was now blurry. His mind wanted to get up immediately and fight, because that was where the enemy speeds up, but his energy was drained. Shin, who was watching from a distance, felt restless, as did the others. The battle had been going on for 5 hours without stopping. SR got back up, launching attacks at the Cyclops. Afterward, he felt sleepy again, and his body felt increasingly heavy. Just a little bit more. The enemy's HP should be almost gone. SR tried to get just one more critical hit, and then he was sure it would be over. After his task for the day was complete, SR was sure he could take a shower for the first time in a week. SR remembered his routine when he was still living as a NET playing MMOVR games. SR intended to return to playing the game, but then he felt confused. SR realized that something like what he felt at that time was impossible in the game. Without realizing it, a blow from the Cyclops landed on SR's back. SR was thrown so far that his teammates who saw it, especially Sarah, looked very shocked. SR felt that he was starting to lose his breath. He intended to press the logout button, but he couldn't find what he was looking for at all. His teammates immediately came to SR. Suzu quickly cast healing magic on SR. SR now realized that he was not in the game. It was reality. SR tried to get up, but he had difficulty. SR had difficulty standing, and his body ached all over. There he just felt what a real attack feels like. After several healing magic sessions, SR could now breathe again. He was saved, but the danger was not over. The Cyclops began to walk towards them. They had to return immediately. Shin prepared for an emergency, while Rika tried to buy time. However, when everyone had agreed to return, SR got up with difficulty and said he was fine. Of course, no one believed it. Shin even emphasized that for him and his teammates, SR and Sarah, who had been with them for the past few days, were more valuable than the Fenin princess. The decision was frustrating, but they had to return. There was no other way. Shin urged them to surrender. Hearing the call to surrender, SR seemed to be unable to accept it silently. He then stood up, walking closer to the enemy, though unsteadily. Sarah tried to hold and pull SR back, but the young man shouted at her, ordering her to just stay still and watch. SR faced the Cyclops again. The scarred young man was now right in front of the Cyclops, ready to attack. When the Cyclops moved to attack, SR also lunged forward with his sword.